was supposed to be my night, the grand opening of the Lumiere district, a project I had poured my soul into. The ballroom shimmered with glass walls and golden lights. A miniature model of the city sat at the center, and my sketches, my designs were hanging like works of art. I had come as a guest, not as family. I was the man who had married into the Harrington name. And yet in that room I was still the outsider. The waiters in crisp tuxedos floated past with champagne. The air smelled of expensive perfume and cold ambition. Whispers followed me. Self-made, sure, but he's nothing without them. Then, under the spotlight, William Harrington, my father-in-law, took the stage. He spoke about legacy, about power, about building monuments that would last centuries. And then, with a smile that cut sharper than a blade, he turned toward me. Architecture, he said, isn't about passion, it's about bloodlines. A man can sketch towers all he wants, but if he doesn't have the foundation, his dreams will collapse with the first storm. Laughter rippled across the hall. I felt it sting like acid on my skin. He raised his glass toward me, voice booming. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce the man who believes he can touch the sky with nothing but borrowed wings. The crowd clapped, some politely, some mockingly. My chest tightened, but I stayed seated. Next to me, my wife looked down at her hands, silent, unable or unwilling to stop him. I set my glass down, folded my napkin, and without a word, I stood. The music, the laughter, the applause, all blurred behind me as I walked through the mirrored hallway. In the reflection, I barely recognized the man staring back. She followed me, heels clicking, her voice trembling. Please, just endure it. For me, for the kids, for everything we've built. I turned, eyes heavy, voice low. And for me. Who endures for me? Silence hung between us. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. I stepped into the night air, the door shutting behind me. The ballroom still echoed with celebration, but for me, something had already broken. The divorce papers were printed on white sheets, but to me they looked like funeral shrouds. We sat across a wooden table at the courthouse. A clerk slid the documents toward us, her eyes bored, as if this was just another transaction in a long day of broken promises. The room was silent except for the scratching of pens. Her signature came first, quick, without hesitation. Mine followed slower, my hand trembling as if it carried the weight of a collapsed building. The clerk stamped the papers, a loud thud like a hammer, driving the final nail into the coffin of our marriage. I looked at her, at my wife, or rather my ex-wife now. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her gaze stayed fixed on the papers as though they could shield her from the wreckage we had become. We left the courthouse separately, no embraces, no goodbyes, just the echo of our footsteps walking in opposite directions. The next day, I returned to what used to be our home. The house smelled faintly of her perfume, mixed with the dust of untouched corners. I packed in silence, books, rolled up blueprints, a few shirts, my old drafting pencils. Each object felt like a memory stripped bare. On the kitchen counter sat a chipped coffee mug, a mug we had bought on our honeymoon in Florence. She wanted to throw it away years ago, but I always kept it cracked, imperfect, but still holding something. I wrapped it carefully in an old shirt as if it were the last fragile piece of who I used to be. In the living room, my daughter Emma clung to my leg. Her small hands gripped me tight, refusing to let go. "Daddy!" "Do you have to leave?" My throat burned, words choking. I knelt, brushing her hair back, forcing a smile. "I'll never leave you, sweetheart. I'll always be here. Just not in this house." She nodded, but her tears betrayed her understanding. She was too young to know the language of divorce, but old enough to feel its weight. Behind her, my son Alex stood, stiff, silent, 16 years old, trying to be strong, but his eyes shimmered with unspoken grief. When I reached out to hug him, he held himself back for a moment, then finally stepped into my arms. It was brief, but it was enough. Enough to tell me he still needed me, even if he didn't know how to say it. That night, I carried my boxes into a small apartment on the east side of the city. The walls were bare, the window overlooked a brick alley, and the radiator groaned like an old man in pain. I dropped the boxes on the floor and sat on the mattress, not even a bed, just a mattress. The silence was deafening. I looked at the chipped coffee mug resting on the nightstand. For years it had survived our arguments, our cold wars, our reconciliations. Now it was just me and the mug, two broken things left behind. The next morning I stuck a calendar on the fridge with a magnet. The custody schedule was written in black ink. Alex every other week, Emma every other weekend. It looked organized, efficient, like a business arrangement. But families aren't businesses, and no calendar could capture the hollow ache of missing my children. That was the beginning of my separation. Not just from her, not just from the Harrington family, but from the man I thought I was. I had been humiliated, and now I was dismantled brick by brick until nothing was left but silence and a chipped mug. The apartment was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that presses down on your chest until you can barely breathe. Every morning I would wake up before the sun, sitting at the small desk by the window, hoping to sketch something new, something brilliant, something that would remind me I was still an architect. But the pencil felt heavier each day, as though even it doubted my worth. The lines came out shaky, lifeless, and when I looked at the page, I didn't see a vision, I saw ruins. At first, I tried to save my firm. I called old clients, begged for meetings, but the Harrington name hung over me like a curse. Doors that had once been open slammed shut. Calls went unanswered, emails ignored. One afternoon, a former investor told me bluntly, "Daniel, it's not you, it's them. No one wants to cross William Harrington, and right now, working with you means going against him." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the dark office long after everyone had left. The city lights blinked outside, but inside everything felt dim. By winter, I had to let most of my staff go. One by one, they shook my hand, some with pity, some with quiet anger. I watched as they packed their desks, their lives uprooted because of me. I told myself I was protecting them, better to release them now than let them starve under a sinking ship. But when the last employee walked out, the silence that followed was unbearable. I stayed behind, sitting in the empty office, staring at the dust where their computers once stood. The hum of the heater was the only sound, and even that seemed to mock me. Money began to vanish faster than I could earn it. I sold my car, then the office furniture, then the big drafting table I once considered sacred. I carried the last blueprint rolls home under my arm as snow fell through the city streets. Pedestrians rushed past me, their coats tight, their breaths visible in the cold air. To them, I was just another man carrying tubes of paper, a nobody. Nights were the hardest. I would sit on the mattress, the cracked mug in my hand, listening to the radiators groan. Sleep never came easy. When it did, it was haunted. I dreamed of buildings, collapsing walls, crumbling because I had forgotten a beam or cut corners to save money. I'd wake drenched in sweat, the echo of falling concrete in my ears. Sometimes I'd walk through the city in the middle of the night, past the towering skyscrapers, past the lights and the laughter spilling out of restaurants. Every window glowed with life while I drifted like a shadow. One evening I ran into Mark, an old construction foreman who had once worked with me. He clapped my shoulder, rough but warm. "Daniel," he said, "I've seen men cut steel wrong, I've seen beams crack. But I've never seen you bend on safety. Don't start now, you're down, I get it. But don't trade your soul to get back up." His words hit hard, because deep down I had thought about it. Taking shortcuts, signing papers, I shouldn't just to claw my way back into relevance. But his voice lingered, a reminder of the man I used to be. Still, the loneliness grew. Emma's laughter was now a phone call every other weekend. Alex's visits were short, filled with silence more than words. When they left, the apartment felt even emptier. There were nights I almost couldn't take it. Nights where I stared too long at the city skyline, wondering what it would feel like to just disappear. But each time the image of my children pulled me back. Their faces were the only thing anchoring me, the only thing I had left. And then came the knock, 3 steady raps against my door. It was late, raining hard, the kind of night when no one visits. I hesitated, heart racing, wondering if I had imagined it. But there it was again, 3 sharp knocks, urgent, insistent. When I opened the door, my son was standing there, soaked through eyes, fierce with something I hadn't seen before. Alex stood in the hallway, rain dripping from his hair onto the carpet. He didn't even have a coat, just a thin hoodie clinging to his shoulders. "Alex," I whispered, pulling him inside. His sneakers squeaked against the floor as he stepped in. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and damp plaster. I grabbed a towel and threw it over him, but he pushed it away, his jaw tight. For a moment we just stared at each other. The storm outside rattled the window. Lightning flashed, lighting up his face, a boy, but not a boy anymore. 16, angry, confused, carrying burdens too heavy for his age. Finally he spoke. "Why'd you let him do it, Dad?" His voice cracked, but his eyes were sharp. He meant William Harrington, of course. The humiliation at the gala. The silence that followed. The divorce that broke us apart. I didn't want to fight in front of everyone," I said softly. "Your grandfather, he controls everything." I thought maybe swallowing it was better than that. Better than what Alex snapped. Better than standing up for yourself. For us, you think hiding makes you strong. It doesn't, Dad. It makes you look small. The words cut deep, but not because they were cruel. Because they were true. I sank into the chair, burying my face in my hands. For so long I had carried shame quietly, pretending the silence was dignity. But in my son's eyes, it wasn't dignity at all. It was surrender. When I looked up again, he was pacing. His fists clenched, his voice shaking with frustration. "I don't care if you have money. I don't care if you can build the biggest tower in the city. I just want my dad back. The one who believed in something, the one who told me that even the smallest brick mattered because it carried the weight of the whole." He stopped pacing, his shoulders trembled, and then softer, almost a whisper, "I don't need the Harringtons. I don't need their name, their money, their legacy. I just need you." The room was silent, except for the storm hammering against the window. I stared at my son, this boy who was suddenly a man, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not shame, something older, something stronger. I stood slowly and crossed the room to him. He flinched just slightly, but I placed my hands on his shoulders, firm but gentle. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought protecting you meant keeping my head down. But I see now, protecting you means standing up even when it hurts. Even when I lose." His eyes shimmered, but he didn't look away. And for the first time in months, maybe years, we truly saw each other. We spent the night talking, not about court dates or money, not about his mother, not about the Harrington empire, just us. He told me about school, about fights with friends, about how he hated pretending everything was fine. I listened, really listened, and somewhere in the middle of it all I laughed. It startled me, the sound of my own laughter after so long. Alex laughed too, shaking his head. It was awkward, clumsy, but it was real. By dawn the storm had passed. The city outside was washed clean, the streets glistening in pale light. Alex leaned against the window, eyes heavy with sleep. I should probably head back before Mom freaks out. I nodded, but my chest ached at the thought of him leaving. He noticed and gave me a tired smile. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll be back."
You're not getting rid of me that easy.
He left the door closing softly behind him. But the silence that followed wasn't the crushing kind anymore. It was hopeful. For the first time in a long time, I felt the foundation of something new beneath my feet. Fragile, unsteady, but real. The morning after Alex left, I stood by the window watching the light spill across the cracked walls. For months I had woken to darkness, but that morning felt different. Not brighter, not easier, just possible. I started with the smallest thing. The dishes, stacks of plates, crusted pans, coffee rings that had become part of the table. I rolled up my sleeves, filled the sink, and for the first time in weeks I cleaned. It was ridiculous how washing a plate could feel like laying bricks again, one on top of another, building something solid from nothing. Next came the apartment. I opened the blinds, let the sun in, swept the floor, until dust swirled like smoke in the light. I bought a plant, cheap, scrappy, barely alive. I set it on the windowsill. Every morning I watered it as if saving it would save me. Days stretched into weeks. I began to cook, burning more meals than I finished, but Emma loved it when she visited. Daddy's pancakes are funny shaped, she laughed, syrup dripping down her chin. Her laughter filled the apartment, turning bare walls into home. Alex came too, not every week, but often. He'd drop his bag in the corner, collapse on the couch. Sometimes we didn't talk much, just sat together watching old movies, sharing silence that no longer hurt. Work found its way back slowly. Small projects at first, renovating a cafe, sketching a bookstore front. The kind of jobs no big firm wanted, but I wanted them.
I met the cafe owner, a woman in her 60s. She said, "I don't need fancy, I need honest. Give me a space that feels alive." I nodded, and for the first time in months my hand didn't shake when I drew. The lines came steady, confident.
When the cafe reopened, the owner hugged me. "It feels like home," she whispered. And in that moment I felt like an architect again. I also started walking. Through the park, along the river, down streets I had avoided. The city I once built for suddenly felt new. Children ran past with kites, couples argued over nothing, street musicians played old guitars. Life was happening, and I was part of it, even if only as a quiet observer. One afternoon, Alex walked with me. He kicked at stones on the path, hands shoved deep in his pockets. After a while he said, "You seem different."
I smiled. Different good or different bad?
He shrugged, smirking. "Different alive." The words stuck with me. Alive, not successful, not powerful, not respected. Alive. The cracks in me were still there. Nights were still hard. Dreams still haunted me with collapsing walls and laughter from crowded ballrooms. But each morning I found a reason to get up. A plant that needed watering, a blueprint that needed drawing, a child who needed a father. Rebuilding didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a triumphant march back into the world. It was slower, quieter, like laying one brick a day, even when the mortar hasn't dried. But day by day, step by step, I was building again. Not towers, not monuments, not legacies carved in stone. Something smaller, something humbler, something real.
A life.
It started with a phone call. Late evening, the city already quiet, I was sketching by the lamp when the phone buzzed.
I almost didn't answer, but something in me did.
Daniel, her voice. My ex-wife. Soft, hesitant. It had been months since we spoke beyond custody schedules. "Yes," I said carefully. Silence stretched. "Then can we talk?" We met at a small diner on the corner, the kind that smelled of coffee and fried onions, a place where no one cared who you were. She looked different. Not glamorous, not polished like she had at the Harrington dinners. Tired, worn down. For a while we just stirred our coffee, then she said it. "My father's company, it's failing."
I froze. The Harrington Empire, untouchable for decades, crumbling.
She nodded slowly. "Bad deals, debt investors pulling out." He pushed too far, Daniel. "And now it's collapsing." Her eyes glistened, but not with pride, with shame. I thought, I thought choosing his side meant stability, but everything's falling apart. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt tired, like watching a storm that had already passed, tearing down the house you no longer lived in. I sipped my coffee, words heavy but steady. You always wanted his approval, but in the end, his empire couldn't even hold itself up. She looked at me, then really looked as if seeing me for the first time in years. "You're different," she whispered. "Stronger, quieter, but stronger." Days later, I heard from Emma. She was curled on my couch, her legs tucked under a blanket. When she whispered, "Mum cries a lot now. Grandpa yells. I don't like being there." I pulled her close, heart twisting. "No one should make you feel small in your own home," I told her. "Not even family."
Her little head pressed against my chest. "Can we stay here more, Daddy? It feels safe." Safe. A word I hadn't heard in a long time, and somehow I realized I could give her that.
One evening Alex came too. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but there was no anger in him anymore. Just calm. "Mum said you listened to her," he said. "She didn't expect that."
I nodded. "Neither did I."
He smirked, shaking his head. "You're still stubborn, but you're not broken anymore. I can tell." His words lingered in the air. Not broken. It was strange to think of myself that way. For so long I had only seen cracks. Even my ex-wife began bringing the kids over more often, not for custody, not for obligation, just because they wanted to. Sometimes she stayed too. Not as a partner, not as someone tied to me, but as the mother of my children, sitting at my table, drinking my bitter coffee, watching Emma color and Alex pretend not to laugh at my burned toast. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was something gentler, a fragile peace. One night after she left, Alex lingered at the door. He turned back, his voice quiet. "You know, Dad, you don't have to hate them forever. Sometimes moving on is stronger than revenge." I looked at him, this boy who had carried my weakness on his shoulders, and I felt it, healing, slow, imperfect, but real. The cracks in my life weren't gone, but light was finding its way through them. For the first time, I wasn't just rebuilding for myself. I was healing for them, for Emma, for Alex, for all of us. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The sun was warm, spilling gold across the park. Emma ran ahead, chasing pigeons, while Alex walked beside me, taller now, his shoulders broadening. For once I didn't feel like a shadow trailing behind them. I felt like a father, present, whole. We found a bench near the fountain. The water shimmered in the light, children laughed, couples strolled past life, unfolding in a way that once felt unreachable. That's when I saw her, my ex-wife, standing at the edge of the path, holding a paper cup of coffee, watching us. For a moment, the world stilled. No courthouse, no arguments, no humiliation. Just two people who had built something together and broken it, yet still shared the two souls running in front of us. She walked over, not proud, not ashamed, simply human. We sat in silence first, listening to Emma's giggles, watching Alex pretend not to smile at her antics. Then she spoke. "Daniel, thank you. For being there when I couldn't. For holding them steady when everything else collapsed." I looked at her, searching for anger, for regret. But all I found was honesty.
"I wasn't always steady," I admitted. "I fell apart too. But they gave me a reason to stand again."
Her eyes softened, and for the first time in years, we weren't enemies. We weren't failed partners. We were parents. And that was enough. Weeks later, word spread that the Harrington Company was gone. Sold off in pieces, debts swallowing the rest. William Harrington himself faded into silence. The man who once humiliated me at his table was now a name whispered in past tense.
I didn't cheer, I didn't gloat, because by then I had already won something greater. A home that felt alive, a bond with my children that no empire could buy. A peace that came not from revenge, but from letting go.
One evening I stood on the balcony of my small apartment. The city glowed beneath me, lights stretching far into the horizon. Emma's laughter echoed from inside her crayon scattered on the table. Alex's deep voice mixed with hers, teasing protective alive. I held the chipped coffee mug in my hands, the one from Florence, the one I had carried through every rise and fall. For years it had been a reminder of everything broken, but now it was something else. A reminder that even cracked things can hold together if you choose to hold them.
I raised the mug to the night sky as if toasting the past and whispered to myself, I'm still here. And for the first time, that was enough.